Hi everyone, this is Milan Lisavljevic. In this week's post, I'd like to talk a little bit about auditions. I actually received a few questions about it, about the process, including from one of last week's posters on my video who asked about how to prepare and how to play Bach in the concerto and in general things to look out for. I certainly have a lot to share on this topic, although you may find my opinions to be not what one would expect. I'd like to help dispel some illusions about the audition process, and I'd like to invite you to hear me out when I suggest a totally different way of actually doing auditions from what you may have heard so far. So I've come up with 5 things I wanted to talk about this. And the first thing I would say is resist sweeping generalizations about what the auditioning process is like. When I was first in school, in grad school, and I started to get interested in this topic, and the idea of getting a job was both enticing and intimidating. I'd hear my peers talk about the process, or even my teachers, and certain things seem to be rather commonly said, such as that you have to play extremely well with this kind of perfection, and that 1 or 2 mistakes will lead to elimination, and this is very dangerous, and that orchestras don't usually want someone with too much personality. They want someone that's really going to fit within a section, within a somewhat narrow framework, and that you may need to change your playing in order to fit into this. And it's really only for a certain type of player that some would even use the word boring. I would in general say every organization is different, every orchestra is different. I think a lot of this isn't true. But whether you agree with that or not, I think generally we can agree that not all orchestras are the same. And just like in the corporate world, or really with any sort of job, you cannot expect the same thing to be always present in what people expect from you when they listen to you. So forget about all this. It's not about perfection. It's not about playing in a certain narrow way that you have to find in order to win. It's actually, and here's the second thing I want to say today, I believe auditions are not about what you've heard so far. They're not about precision or fitting within a certain narrow framework. They're actually about imagination. You have to play these tiny little bits of music from orchestral works, and these bits are incredibly isolated from the larger whole, from their context. And it takes a lot of mental strength, it takes a lot of imagination, it takes a very well developed inner ear in order to be able to somehow create the atmosphere of the piece that you're playing immediately from the very first of your incredibly exposed excerpt. I found that this really does take a lot of work and a lot of inventiveness, but not the kind of work that means that you just drill excerpts until nothing is out of tune ever, and nothing could ever possibly be out of rhythm because, well, you've just done all the work with metronome. Let me use a possibly silly but I think helpful analogy nonetheless. So it's the third thing I wanted to use to illustrate my point. In this day and age, America and a lot of the developed world is obsessed with food, and you see a lot of cooking shows and people talk a lot about restaurants and what they're about. Now, when you go to a restaurant, what are you really going there for? Chances are you're going to eat something because you're hungry. But you will agree with me that it's also about a lot more than that. If you're spending a bit more money, you want to go to a place that's going to make you feel good, that's going to somehow make you remember something about it, at least for the rest of the evening. The atmosphere is nice, you feel wanted, you don't feel like you just came there so they would take your money. Do you go to a restaurant because they washed their vegetables well or they prepared their meat well? Just bear with me for a second. I know this seems silly, but is this why you're going to a restaurant? Well-washed vegetables? Meat that's been cooked properly? You'll say no, of course not. That's a given. Let's try to look at intonation and rhythm the same way. These are givens. It's what's already part of what you're doing because you've been developing these tools for so long. You play in rhythm and in tune. But just focusing on playing in rhythm and in tune in order to win a job is going to precisely lead to you not being able to play in rhythm and in tune, because an extensive, or I should say excessive amount of focus on this is only going to derail you. But if you focus on imagination, on really having something to say, on finding the mood of the symphonic work you're playing and presenting it immediately from the first note of your performance, I can assure you, you're already well ahead of a lot of people. I've heard a number of auditions in my life, and I am sorry to say that interesting playing is rare. When somebody shows up there to us, the audition committee, behind the screen, and we suddenly hear real emotional involvement and a desire to share something with the listeners, we perk up. It's very powerful. That's what we want to hear. You know, we want to be moved as well. We also don't want to go to a restaurant that just washes its vegetables well and knows how to cook the meat, because that's boring. I've never been awed by precise playing without mistakes. I don't want to be sitting next to the person. It's the most boring thing I've ever heard. And again, like I said, maybe you don't want to generalize what I'm saying as well. There just might be an orchestra or 5 where they want playing that's boring. I don't know. Statistically, it is impossible to audition enough orchestras and then poll the juries and then know exactly what they're after. But an understanding of the human psychology clearly indicates that only with communicating something to another person will you truly leave an impression that will then, in the case of auditions, lead to you being someone that they want to hear again and again and ultimately work with. Don't just go for precision. It's not going to get you anywhere. You know, in all these things, it all depends what you measure. A measurement of a successful audition taker who has in fact won may be that they play in rhythm and in tune, but that's just one thing you've decided to measure, and I think it is far from the only one. So work a lot of imagination. Listen to the excerpts. Get into the mood of the piece. I listen to the symphonic works that the excerpts are from incessantly, in weeks and even months leading to the audition. Because I want to immerse myself in the sound, in the atmosphere, in the textures, in the emotions of the piece, so that as soon as I put the bow on the string, I am in this world already. It is so deeply embedded in me. And it is so powerful that my fingers are not really going to make a mistake, because I'm just gliding down this path that is clearly in my head. There's 2 small things I also wanted to mention. One is, this is really a vast topic, but to briefly touch upon it, I believe that in auditions you can sense what people are after, and people's agendas, if you will, can be heard. I can't always tell you maybe in words after I heard someone, well, is this person unhappy with their current career and just wants the job to because they're tired of the insecurity of the freelance world? Is this person trying to prove something? Is this person just doing this for the experience? I'm maybe not always sure. It's not something that I can necessarily verbalize after I've heard someone. But somehow, every human being, every musician who's listening to you, will somehow sense what's inside you. I hear people who prepare auditions, who play for me, and sometimes I hear angst. I hear a desire to prove oneself, or I hear a frustration that one hasn't won a job yet after 20 auditions. And I deeply sympathize with this, but if you go into the audition with that mindset, oh, I paid so much money to be here. This took days just to get here. I spent weeks, if not months, preparing. I spent so much money for this audition. I gotta at least get to the semis to feel like it's worth it. You're going to derail yourself very badly. First of all, it puts you in that kind of state of mind. And the other problem is the audition committee senses you're coming from, in a way, unhealthy place. Ideally, you're in an audition to share something that you've created with love. And I think this will pass through. I think going in there and thinking, I don't know about this, I don't really feel prepared, I'm not sure I really have what it takes, what are they really looking for, and so on. If this is your state of mind, you might find it quite hard to win. But anyway, this is a vast topic, and I will talk about the psychology of viola performance and performance in general in a future post. And the last thing I wanted to share, nothing perhaps outstandingly new for anyone who's been thinking about music, but it's something that I feel needs to be reiterated in the case of auditions as they become controversial. That is that you have to be yourself. I get a lot of questions, well, what do you think the committee is expecting? Like, say, the question from last week. What are you expecting to hear in Bach? What are you expecting to hear in excerpts? I am planning to demonstrate an excerpt and a little bit of Bach next week, so you can look forward to this video. I'm going to demonstrate a couple of things that I find are enjoyable to hear and are indicative of a kind of musician that we want to have in our section versus those that aren't. But generally, this is a lot like relationships. You can go on that first date and you can try to awe the person with how smart you are or how accomplished you are, and you try to make jokes and so on and so forth. You try to seduce them. Ultimately, only being yourself is going to work, because faking that you're smarter or funnier than you really are is not going to get you anywhere. Very soon the person is, even if they don't necessarily have facts they can hang on to, they sense that something about this is inauthentic. And playing to please the audition committee to get a job, I can't imagine very many things that are more inauthentic than that. It just cannot be done, regardless of how talented or smart you are, or how much time you put in it. So don't even try. An orchestra that has different values from what you have to offer isn't the right orchestra for you. It's simply not going to work long term. Anyway, this is a vast topic, but I thought in this week's video that I would try to cover some of the most common misconceptions I've been hearing for years about this topic. So to summarize, I would say, don't listen to a lot of the conventional wisdom. It all depends on the orchestra. Focus on imagination. It's showing an imaginative attitude that helps you, and not just doing the basics like intonation and rhythm and so on. These are givens if you have something to say. It's not perfect playing that wins. It's that when somebody makes too many mistakes that you start to wonder, are they really solid? That's why that might derail you. Nobody, no orchestra wants a player, like no chamber ensemble wants a player. Nobody wants a player who slips into, in technically inaccurate playing for periods of time. You just want somebody who knows how to do their job well. That's really all it is. It's not about expectations of perfection from every member. So find a good place in your head. Come to an audition to create, to give something to people who are listening to you, even if you never meet them. And ultimately be yourself, because the only way to impress, but I use that word very carefully, impress a committee, to communicate something to them, is by being yourself and sharing what you really feel inside you with those who are listening to you, even if it's behind the screen. Thank you so much. Please leave your comments below, and I will talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.